What's up, everybody, and welcome to episode 9 of that Triathlon show, where today we're focusing on open water swimming. I'm your host, Michael, and I'm joined here today by Brenton Ford, who is an Australian swim coach and founder of Effortless Swimming. He's a former national level swimmer himself, and he coaches swimmers, master swimmers, and triathletes of all different levels, hosts swimming camps, and he has a podcast himself, and he wants to just generally share his knowledge about swimming, swim technique and skills, how to train for it, and structure swim training to help swimmers and the triathletes. So, Brenton, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Michael. It's good to be on here. And I know we've been in touch via email the last couple of months, and it's good to finally come on and hopefully share something that will help the people listening.
Yeah, excellent. So why don't you take a quick minute to fill in any gaps from that intro?
Well, it was all pretty much spot on. My background is competitive swimming, and I competed at a national level for 6 or 7 years. And then I started coaching about 10 or 11 years ago and just fell in love with it. It wasn't something that I intended to do, but I started coaching, loved it. And over the last probably 4 or 5 years have just really tried to work mostly with triathletes. And I started triathlons about 12 months ago as well. I had a bucket list thing, which was to do an Ironman before I had my first child. So I did New Zealand Ironman in, March this year. And I loved it and got to experience all the training that everyone goes through and saw why people get addicted to the sport. And it was a really, really good journey. And I haven't been back to doing triathlons just yet because I've got a little 5-month-old boy, but just an awesome experience. And I learned a lot about the sport and also about the swimming component of it, because the training is different from when you're training for a triathlon to training for a pool event. So it was good to get a better understanding of those differences.
So just out of curiosity, before we dive into the open water swimming interview, which is the main segment today, but did you find that it made a very big difference in your training coming from a pure swimming background when you now had to do the bike and run training as well, in what you could do in the pool and how it felt? And did it surprise you in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. The two biggest things for me, number one was time. Obviously, you got to spend time on the bike, spend time running. So to find that time to swim as well, you've got to be quite good with your time management. But probably the biggest thing was mobility, and also heaviness in the legs. So for me, I found that my mobility got a lot poorer, especially through the shoulders. So I was a lot less flexible from all the running and riding that I was doing. So I really had to stay on top of that. And I saw a direct correlation between my flexibility and my swim time. So in the space of about 6 weeks, my swim times had slowed down by about 2 seconds per 100, just from all the riding and running that I was doing. And that was until I got back on top of my mobility and flexibility. And the other thing was I swam a lot more with the pool buoy. So I changed the training that I was doing to use a lot more gear, like pool buoy, paddles, that sort of thing. So I did see a bit of a difference there, and it felt a lot different than when I was just doing swimming. So it's, as a triathlete, you spend so much time bent over when you're riding and running that you do need to compensate for that with some of the things that you do in your swimming workouts.
That's really interesting to hear, like, actual numbers about how the flexibility and mobility can affect your swim times. And I guess it's not that easy to come up with numbers. We hear all the time that we need to work on flexibility and mobility, and we know that it's good for us, but we don't know how good. And this is an excellent example of how much of a difference it can make. So that was super interesting. So let's talk about open water swimming now. And let's start with, what are the differences that you see in and the differences and the similarities between open water swimming and pool swimming?
Yeah, so for me, working with a lot of triathletes, I originally used to work with pool swimmers mostly, but now it's mostly triathletes. And obviously open water swimming is a big part of that. And one of the things I normally get people to focus on, the first thing's a slightly faster stroke rate. And that can come naturally from wearing a wetsuit. So if you're wearing a wetsuit, or if you're in the ocean where there's salt water, you're going to be a bit more buoyant. So naturally, it's easy to get your stroke rate up. But for the most part, we try and get people to raise it by 2, 3, or 4 strokes per minute. Just because if you're in open water, there's often going to be chop and there's going to be other people around. So in order to have stability and balance, you sometimes need to get that stroke rate up a little bit. So that's the first thing. One of the other things is your recovery can often change as well. So when you come over the top of the water with your arm, a lot of people try and stay very close to the water with their hand as they come over the top. And what that can do, if there is that chop or any waves, it's a lot easier to hit your hand on that oncoming water. So what we do with a lot of people is get them to recover a little wider, a little more open with their arms over the top, and not be afraid to swim with a slightly straighter recovery too. If you look at the top guys in ITU or Ironman, a lot of those people are swimming with a straighter arm recovery. And that's because you're going to be a little bit tighter in a wetsuit. And it doesn't matter too much how you get over the top of the water. It's more about how you enter and then what happens after that. So there's no point being too pretty or too cautious with that recovery. We focus on just getting the hand in front of the shoulder, driving in with some assertiveness and purpose, because if you're being too soft and gentle, you're going to become a bit of a victim in the water there. Some of the other things are obviously the open water skills, and it's almost like a separate stroke in itself. When I first started open water swimming, it took me probably 2 or 3 years to get good at those skills because I came from a pool swimming background. I'd done that for 15 years. And then when I first went open water, I wasn't nearly as good as I should have been based on the experience that I had in the water. So it took me a good couple of years to really get those down and get good at them. But practicing swimming in the open water, your sighting, your drafting, it's really a skill that you've got to have and navigating. And probably the last thing is just the timing of the stroke. So for some people, when they go open water, they'll benefit from having what we call split stroke timing. And a friend of mine, Annie Jones, she's a coach over in Boulder, Colorado. She talks a bit about this. But when you look at the top triathletes and some of the open water swimmers, you'll see that one arm will recover over the top faster than the other arm. So it's that split stroke time, and it's not going to be that constant ticking over. They've got that sort of choppy stroke that you see, and that can help you deal with waves and chop again. And it can be a really good strategy and a good way to find your rhythm when you're swimming open water.
Right. So how then should we train differently as triathletes and open water swimmers compared to how a traditional pool swimmer would train?
Some of the things I do with my squad when I'm coaching them, the first thing is just probably once a week, we'll do some open water skills in the pool. So we'll practice swimming in a pack, having other people around you, getting comfortable being uncomfortable in the water, and getting used to having people touch your feet or you being behind someone and having the water chopped up. So practicing those sorts of skills of swimming in a pack and not being completely calm and still water is a good way to do that. And you can do that in the pool, and it just takes swimming with a squad to do it. If you're training on your own, it's a little bit harder to do. But if you can get to the open water, if you can get to the lake or the ocean and just practice swimming in the environment that you're going to be racing in, it's the first step to getting better in the open water. Some of the things that we also do in training is just practicing your sighting. So navigation is probably one of the main things that can slow someone down. If you don't swim straight in the race, it's absolutely wasted energy. You can swim 10%, 20% more than what the actual distance of the race is. And if you look at your Garmin for your last race, if it's not within, maybe 5% of what the actual course is, then you may have gone off course a little bit. So just navigation and practicing your sighting. And you only need to do that once a week to get used to it, but having the right method of doing that is really important too. So what I often see people doing is when they go to sight, they'll do it the wrong way. They'll do it, they'll take a stroke and then they'll look forward. And it's a little bit hard to explain over a podcast, but basically what a lot of people do, which slows them down, is they'll take a stroke and then they'll look forward instead of looking forwards and then taking a stroke and breathing. So it's called the sight and breathe method. And I've got a video on YouTube which takes you through it. But just those basic skills, getting those down, practicing them in the pool is the first thing that I'd get people to do.
Yeah, that's a good breakdown, and I'll include a link to the video in the show notes. I've seen that one actually, and it's really good. Really explains it well. And one thing that I was going to ask you is, do you always practice sighting in the open water, or do you practice the actual technique of sighting, even though you don't necessarily practice navigation in the pool as well?
Yeah, if you practice it in the pool, it's the next best thing to doing it in the ocean. And it's good to get used to sighting every 4, 6, or 8 strokes. A lot of people, when I'm first working with them, they're not sighting enough. So they might be taking 12 to 20 strokes in between every look forward. And it's just not enough. You've got to do it between every 4 and 8 strokes. Depends on the conditions and the course, and whether you know everyone's on track and you can follow feet. It comes down to a lot of variables. But if you watch the top triathletes, you'll see how regularly they're sighting. So just getting comfortable making it a part of your stroke, so you're not changing your rhythm or your timing, is a really big thing. So if you've only been swimming for 12 months and you haven't done much practice with sighting, it's worth spending a bit of time doing that before you start your first race.
That's a really good point. And regarding the swimming, getting on feet and trying to draft off someone and follow their navigation, that's not always a good idea either. It depends a bit on where you are in the pack. If you're off the front, then and just have the lead swimmers ahead of you, then that might be a good idea, because they will generally be strong swimmers who are also good at navigating. But if you're mid pack or back of the pack, then you have no idea really how well the person in front of you is navigating. So you really need to take your own responsibility to do your own navigation, and not necessarily try to get those drafting advantages, because it will really be negligible if you go off course. So
that's exactly right. Yeah. And just a quick story with that. I had the triathlete Clayton Fattel on the podcast probably 12 months ago, 18 months ago. And he told the story of when he was doing the Alcatraz race, and he was originally sitting on Andy Potts' feet, and he thought that Andy was going off course a little bit. So Clayton decided to swim his own race and not follow his feet, and he ended up getting out of the water first. So even with those top guys, sometimes they're not going to be directly on course. So it's about taking that responsibility and making that judgment call. So look at the person in front, look at where you're ideally going, and then make that judgment call when the time comes.
Yeah. So workouts in the open water, how do you structure them? Can you give some specific examples of what you do?
Yeah, so if you're swimming on your own, the way I'd normally do it is I like to keep it very simple. But an example of a couple of workouts you could do if you're on your own in the lake or the ocean, one would be to do 400 or 500 meters warm up, get yourself ready, and then we'll do variants of on and off. So it might be you might go for 10 minutes or 15 minutes of swimming where you're going 50 strokes fast, 50 strokes easy, 50 strokes fast, 50 strokes easy. So just getting used to having that changing pace is a good way to do it. Another thing I'd sometimes do is where I live here in Melbourne, the beach that I'd normally swim at, there's about a 400 meter pole to pole swim course. So I might do something like three lots of 400 or 4 lots of 400, and I'm looking to get faster each one. So the first one's easy, second one's medium, third one's fast. So you can do very similar types of workouts that you do in the pool. It just depends on who you're with. And if you've got a group to swim with, then it's really good to do some race practice. So have everyone start on the beach or start in the water, and then set up a little course that might be 400 or 500 meters, and just get used to having everyone around you swimming fast and just trying to get one up on each other, and get used to that race environment, because there's nothing that beats race practice. And even, if you take 4 months, 5 months out of the season in the off season when you're training and you haven't got any races, more often than not, you'll probably feel in that first race, you still haven't quite got your skills down pat. So if you haven't raced for a little while, you really want to get that practice in there. And the best way to do it is make it as close to race practice as possible. And you can do that with a group of people.
And that's a really good segue into talking about the race itself and what you should do in the race. Well, we talked about drafting and sighting and navigation already, and you mentioned they're getting sharp by doing race practices. But anything else that specifically for race day that you should do to prepare yourself and do in the race itself?
Yeah, one of the there's a bit of a routine that I'd normally go through on race day, and that is to get there pretty early. And I know a lot of triathletes tend to be very OCD about this type of thing, about going through their routine, which is good. You want to have that routine. So I'd get there early, make sure I've got time to warm up, get comfortable. have a look at the course. So if you don't know exactly where the course is going, just have a look at where the buoys are and just see if they line up with anything, so that you know as soon as you turn that first buoy, you might need to look for something bigger behind it, because if it's hard to see, you might need to look at some objects or trees or buildings on the land that are behind that buoy to help you navigate. But some of the other things are to visualize that race. So if you haven't visualized yourself going through that triathlon before the day, even just for a couple of minutes beforehand, I'd normally just picture myself how I want the race to go and how I want to be in that swim. So for me, I always want to lead the swim, because that's my strongest leg. So I'd picture myself getting away from the group or the pack within the first couple 100 meters, and then swimming my own race and picturing the time I want to do and how I want it to feel. And then after that, it's about doing a bit of a warm up. So when I'm working with people, I ask them what their warm up is before a race, and some of them won't get in the water and swim. And it's probably one of the biggest mistakes you can make, I think. I mean, some triathlons, they don't allow you to get in the water and swim, but if you've got that option and you're not getting in the water, you probably find that after the first 300 or 400 meters, you might feel very fatigued and heavy. And it's just because you haven't done that pre-race warm-up. So I'd always get my swimmers to do some easy swimming, then maybe some drills and some sculling and some kick, just to get a feel for the water. But then make sure you're actually getting the heart rate up, opening the capillaries up, and just getting that blood flowing. Because if you haven't got the blood flowing before the race, that's when you start to feel fatigued straight after that. So doing the right warm up, and then just finding your spot in the pack and on the start line. Because if you're a swimmer who's not comfortable in the open water and you decide to sit in the middle of the swim pack, there's a good chance you might be swum over the top, or you might have people who are hitting your legs and hitting your arms, and you're not comfortable with that. So just whatever it is for you, find that spot in the group or on the start line that is going to be most comfortable for you and fits your race plan. And then in the race itself, I like to keep it very simple, but for me, it just comes down to that first 300 meters, just try and keep the heart rate down, get the speed up, but keep the heart rate down, and find that rhythm that I can settle into. Because if you're racing an Ironman event, it's a good 45 to an hour and a half of swimming, 45 minutes to an hour and a half of swimming. So it's all just about finding that rhythm that you can settle into and you can maintain for the race. And I've seen a lot of people try and race someone else's race. So they'll go to the start line, they'll be next to someone, and that person might be 5-10 minutes faster than them overall, and they try and stick with them for the first 400 meters. And by that stage, they've just blown up and they've got nothing left. So it's, again, you've got to make that judgment call the 400 meters, because you've tried to stick with someone, then it's going to end up being a slower time. And that's what I saw when I raced my first half Ironman, my first Ironman. I had the same swimmer who started next to me, and for the first 300 meters, he tried to stick with me. I could tell he was going too hard, because I could tell he wasn't going to be able to keep up that speed and that stroke rate. And then he dropped away and got swallowed by the pack after that. So again, you've got to make that judgment call, but try and swim your own race as much as possible.
Yeah, pacing is really huge in all disciplines of triathlon, but in swimming specifically, do you have any indicators for what pace you should go in your race if you are doing your first race for the season, for example, and not quite sure yet? Is it just the based on open water race specific workouts, or do you have any way to translate pool times for specific sets into potential good race paces? How do you do that?
Yeah, well, to get an idea of the pace that you might be swimming in a race, we do things that we call threshold sets, also known as CSS sets, but we call them threshold sets. And it's basically that swimming at that speed and that effort where you're not quite filling up with lactic acid, you're still able to flush that from your system. So we might do a set of, say, 1500s at threshold pace, where you're looking to, it's fast, but it's sustainable. And if let's say that's a 130 and you're going on a 145, if you can maintain that 130 over the 15100s, then you've got a pretty good idea that you can probably hold that for your, say, Olympic distance triathlon. Now, if you're wearing a wetsuit, it might be a little bit faster. It can be anywhere from 5 seconds up to 15 seconds. If you're a swimmer who's at around a 2-minute pace per 100 or 2:15 per 100, we've seen people who have gotten 10 or 15 seconds faster per 100 just by putting a wetsuit on. So it's going to vary for each swimmer. But what I find has been the best way to get a feel for what pace you can hold is by swimming without your Garmin. So swimming without your watch and just getting a feel for the effort that you're putting in for the pace that you're getting. So one of my my biggest pet hates is people who are on the watch all the time. If I had my way, I'd want them to just not use their watch at all, because swimming is so much about feel. You know, what I focus on a lot is technique, and we run a lot of clinics and camps around Australia and overseas, and they're just focused mostly on technique. And if you focus too much on your watch, then you're not thinking that much about the feel for things. But you hear a lot of coaches, you hear a lot of swimmers talking about feel for the water, and it's also a feel for your pacing. So if you find it hard to judge that pace in a race, then you might be on your watch too much and thinking about it. Because when you're swimming in a race, you're not going to be looking at your pace like you would on the bike or on the run. So what I'd recommend for most people is don't train with a watch. Just remember your workout. You can upload it to Training Peaks later on, but the best way to get a feel is without that watch.
Yeah, that's a good tip. So you advise that you would still have the watch, but just not look at it when you say that you can still upload it later, or was that what you meant?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can still wear the watch, but if you're looking at it after every 100 or every 200 meters, and you're looking at what time you're coming in at, it's taking away the focus from your technique and your feel to just being too focused on the watch. So try and just stay away from the watch as much as possible. And my preference is to not wear it. And I'll get a lot of blowback from people who are listening to this, but that's my personal opinion. Is I've never swum with a watch, and for me it works best. And for the athletes that I've had change over to it, it's it takes a little bit of getting used to, and for some of them they're annoyed that they're not tracking that workout. But it's more about improving your swimming and becoming a better swimmer, and it's not about what your Strava segment says.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And races are won in the race, or you can improve in races, but how much you track your workouts doesn't really matter at the end of the day. So finally, one question about open water swimming is for those people who have open water anxiety or swimming anxiety, especially in races where there's a crowded mass start. Do you have any specific tips for those people?
Yeah, the main one is focus on your breathing. So we run a camp called our Hell Week camp, and that's in Thailand. And one of the coaches who we had over there, he spoke to the group about keeping your heart rate down on the start line. Because if you're racing an Ironman and you've trained for 12 months in the lead up to it, you're going to have a lot of nerves and anxiety on that start line because so much work has gone into it. But if you can just keep your heart rate down and just focus on your breathing. So big, slow breaths in and out, and just keeping as calm as possible and get that heart rate down. You're going to be so much better off when it comes to the race, because it's a very long day ahead of you. So there's no point getting amped up and G'd up and ready to just fire off that start line. It's about staying as relaxed as possible. And if you watch the top pool races, so your Michael Phelps, your Ian Thorpe, most of those guys, when they do PBs in the water, they often say it didn't feel like that. It felt too easy. So it's all about staying as relaxed as possible. So what I try and do on the start line is just slow my breath down. So I'll take a breath in for 4 to 5 seconds and a breath out for 4 to 5 seconds as well. And just keep doing that and just relax as much as possible until that start gun goes. The other thing would just be visualization, and also practicing going to the open water and practicing that, because a lot of that anxiety can come from the uncertainty of being in maybe deep water or water that you can't see a few meters ahead of you. So just practicing that as much as possible in a safe environment where you can build up that confidence is the other thing that I'd recommend.
Excellent tips. So let's move into the rapid fire questions segment where we've got 5 fast questions with 5 fast answers. So are you ready?
Let's go for it.
What's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to swimming or triathlon?
My favorite book on swimming is probably Sheila Tiamina's book, Swim Speed Secrets. Really, it's not a long read, but it's got some really good tips in there. So that's probably my favorite one.
What's your favorite swimming tool or toy?
I can't go anywhere without my engine swim paddles and my DMC fins.
What's a personal habit that's helped you achieve success?
Probably being around people who push me to be better. So when I started triathlons last season, had a lot of friends who were doing triathlons and forcing me to get better. So just surrounding myself with people who knew I could do better than where I was at.
What's the most beautiful place where you've ever been open water swimming?
There's 2. One is a place in Turkey called Kash. I did a swim trek there. That was amazing. And the second place would probably be Korčula in Croatia.
And finally, what do you wish you had known or wish you had done differently at some earlier point in your career?
I had to think about this one, and it would be sleep more. So I think I was chronically sleep deprived for probably 8 years growing up and swimming. So I wish I'd have slept more, because to me it was about, push harder, sleep less, do more. But now we know sleep you need it for your recovery. So I would have slept a lot more than I did.
How much did you sleep then, and how much are you sleeping now?
Well, I was sleeping probably maybe 5 hours to 6 hours on a good night. And now I've got a little baby, so it's not much more. But ideally, I try and get around 8 hours when I can.
Yeah, in a few years, you'll get back to that.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I'm looking out for it. Can't wait.
All right, this has been great, Brenton. So finally, is there something that you want to plug and tell the listeners where they can find out more about you?
Well, I post a lot of videos and podcasts on our website at effortlessswimming.com. In the next probably 5 weeks, we're launching a service where you can do remote video analysis with us. So we run a lot of clinics around Australia, but it's very hard to get overseas. So one of the things we're about to launch is through this app that we're working with. You can grab your phone, open this app, and then have someone record you swimming, or you can upload GoPro footage, and that will come directly to myself or one of our other coaches, and we can give you video feedback. So if you subscribe to our newsletter at effortlessswimming.com, once that is up and going, we'll send an email out. But looking forward to working with people all around the world and offering what we do to people, not just in Australia, but worldwide.
That sounds like an excellent service. That's probably the one thing, if I had to pick one that has helped me improve my swimming the most, it's having a coach film me with a GoPro and then do the video analysis. And now this makes it available and more accessible for more people. So that's excellent. Definitely.
Yeah,
I encourage people to check that out.
The first time that you filmed yourself, was that did you look different than you thought?
Yeah, I didn't expect too much, but yeah, it did. And and even when you start to improve, you expect it to look. You expect how the visual imagery of looking at yourself swimming to have improved more from the previous times, since your times are improving. But you notice that you're still doing some of the same flows, just to a slightly lesser extent. So that, well, in a way, it's encouraging, because you know that there's still a lot more time to shave when you get those flows sorted out. So, but yeah, it does look different than you expect.
Yeah, that's the feedback I always get, and it's as a coach, we look at it as, right, not what can we fix today, but what's the plan, what's the path for the next 6 months, 12 months, and a few years down the track for those that are looking to be a triathlete for years to come. So it's a really gradual process, but having that constant feedback is really key. So that's why we're launching the service, is to be able to work with people on a consistent basis and not just a one-off basis.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely excellent. So thank you again for coming on the show, and thank you for listening to all the listeners, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for having me.